Okay, so if we carry on from where we left off, where we're talking about phenomenology being rooted in philosophy, and the way we're going to find out how someone attaches meaning to a particular occurrence is we need to ask them. So really we're going to look at interviews or potentially look at some written documentation, some personal writings. And ethnography is based more in anthropology, so we're thinking about culture and community there. So a particular group. So what do we think life is like for this particular group? So again, there's different ways we can do this. So it might be participant observation. It might be more these informal or formal interviews, or again, video or photographic analysis of the phenomenon that you're interested in that particular group. Sorry. So if we move on to sociology, so it's grounded theory. So this is where we're thinking about what's happening. So we're asking the questions what's happening, and this comes from sociology, and it's based on in-depth focus groups. And then the last one we're thinking about again comes from sociological and linguistic type studies. So this is called discourse analysis, and it's very much about communication. So what are they communicating, or how are they communicating? And we'd be thinking about document analysis and participant observation. Okay, so this is quite a lot of information in this table. My suggestion would be, if when you start reading qualitative research, it's probably quite good to look back at this. So if it says this is a study, and a phenomenological study, you could kind of just have a glance at this and go, okay, now I kind of understand why they've done what they've done. So it just gives you these different research traditions, the sorts of what would be the focus and the origin of it, the ways you'd collect the data, and how it might then be presented at the end. So a useful table, one to look over, as I say, probably will make sense when you start reading some of that literature. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is you're going to pause the screencast now, and I've set up a Google Community, which you'll have the link for on Blackboard, and I want you to think about answering these questions. So why would you choose to conduct qualitative research? What do you think the benefits are? What do you think the possible limitations are? So if you could give us maybe 2 or 3 benefits, 2 or 3 limitations, that'd be great. So just post those ideas onto the Google Community, and then maybe each of you could come up with an idea for a question that you might want to answer using qualitative information. So this feeds into part of the learning outcome for your summative assessment, and helps you to start understand the main principles and values of qualitative evidence. Okay, so hopefully you've paused and had a go with that task. If we then move on, this just gives you the process that you'd be following or researchers would be following when they're doing qualitative research. So you would start, as you would with quantitative, with a research question. Again, the difference being that this isn't a hypothesis, this is a general research question. So you'd then move on to select the methodology that's appropriate for this research question, select your subjects, your sites, etc. So this is your recruitment stage. And then you'd go on to collect the data using the appropriate data collection methods. And then we have this cycle in qualitative research. So you would have collected a certain amount of data and start that interpretation, and that helps form some of the sort of starts of the concepts, of the ideas, the themes, the patterns, the sort of theoretical understanding that comes from your interpretation. And this enables people to really start tighten up their research question, and then leads potentially to more collection of data, and then further interpretation. So this cycle, apologies. this cycle will continue until the point where the data is almost saturated, where it feels like there aren't any more, there isn't any further themes emerging, or there isn't any more requirement to tighten this research question. So this bit is quite different from quantitative, where you would generally collect all the data and then do your interpretation and go through to writing up of your findings. So it's this cycle in the middle that's a little different. Okay. So data collection, there's different ways of collecting data. We've already alluded to some of them earlier in the presentation. So because we're exploring participants' experiences, opinions, beliefs, expectations, etc., then asking questions is often the most powerful collection tool. Observation can be helpful if we're thinking about non-verbal interactions, and tools that qualitative researchers will have available to them are things like topic guides, predetermined questions if that's appropriate. So if you were doing a more structured based interview opposed to an unstructured interview or focus group, the use of follow-up questions to explore those ideas in greater depth, the paraphrasing back to the participants to ensure that you've really got the meaning and the understanding. And for all qualitative researchers, there needs to be plenty of inquisitiveness and a lot of planning pre-data collection. So sampling, again, this just gives you an idea around the different types of sampling techniques, and remembering that we're not concerned about sample size per se, not in the way we are in quantitative data collection. Okay, so there's different types of data collection methods. These are the four main groups. So observational studies, surveys or questionnaires. These need to, the questions that are asked in these obviously need to be open questions and not collecting numerical data. So interviews, so that might be semi-structured, where you have a selection of questions, but the freedom to be able to ask us other questions based on the participants' responses, through to structured, where it's a predefined set of questions and you only ask those questions, through to unstructured, where you have a broad topic and it's more like a free-flowing conversation. And then focus groups, that's where we're getting together a group of participants to discuss the particular topic. Again, that could be using sort of structured, fairly structured questions through to unstructured a conversation, and there may be benefits to getting a group together to discuss these things, opposed to one-to-one interviews. However, whatever method is chosen, it needs to be appropriate to the research question that's being asked, and that needs to be justified really in any kind of write-up. So the next thing, again on Google Communities, I want you to have a go at filling out this table. So overall we'll come up with a kind of consensus on what we think the pros and cons are of these different research methodologies. So what do you think an observation study, what's the pros and cons of that? Same with the other methods. So work your way down that table, and just popping in that last column, how you think you would do that effectively. What would mean that you knew you were doing that effectively? Okay. So the last section, we're just going to think about data analysis. So this is it needs to be systematic. It's a way of exploring the data, looking at the sort of words, sentences, paragraphs. So going through that to pull out the different kind of themes and ideas. So it's a systematic way to organise kind of the themes and ideas that are found from the data itself, and linking that back to the aims and objectives of the research. So you would collect your data. If it's interviews, focus groups, you'd be transcribing that data. So that means taking the oral recordings and writing them out word for word, or typing them out word for word, so you have that transcript of the interview or the focus group. It's a time-consuming process, but it's the first stage of data analysis because you're really beginning to be familiar with that data. If you were looking at videos, again, you might be doing some transcription of what's said in the videos, but also noting down things like non-verbal communication. Okay, so there's three methods of qualitative, or three commonly used methods of data analysis. So we've got grounded theory, we've got thematic analysis, and we've got framework approach. So framework approach is where you have already got a body of evidence around the topic that you're interested in, and you're able to come up with some predefined categories. So after you've collected the data and you've transcribed that from the interviews or the focus groups, you would go through that transcription and use your predefined categories that would create a code, and you would then apply those codes to the transcript of the interview or the focus group. Whereas in thematic analysis, you haven't got a set of predefined categories or codes. You're creating those codes as you go through analysing the transcripts. So as you go from, say, interview 1 to 2 to 3, you'll start to see common themes appearing, and then you'll use those as codes, and you'll go back. By interview 4 or 5, you will have your codes, and you'll be able to go back and code interviews 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again with all of those codes that you're creating as you go through the analysis. And then you'll be pulling them together into themes. Grounded theory is about doing sort of in-depth analysis of the data, and then creating theories based on the data that comes out of your analysis. So this table here just gives you the process. So this is thematic analysis, but as you can see, there is a clear process for the researchers, and this just describes the process. So this is a way of ensuring quality within qualitative research, and when you're reading your papers, you would be expecting them to describe these stages if they're doing thematic analysis. So a question, how would you know that the analysis of the data is the correct interpretation? So we're just leaving that as a thought for you. In seminar 11, you're moving on to look at critical appraisal of qualitative research. So there is some prep that you need to do for that. So these 2 articles, we ask you to read those, and you'll be critically appraising those 2 articles. Thank you for listening.